I think that if you look at Dean Martin and you're at a certain age, you're thinking through your memories. Has there ever been a documentary about Dean? I know much has been written about him.
There's never been a definitive documentary about Dean, which is why we took interest in doing it. I'll just tell you how it started.
Please do.
In 2015, I was doing a really fun documentary called Davi's Way about Robert Davi, a character actor who was obsessed with Frank Sinatra and wanted to celebrate Frank's 100th birthday by putting on a big concert. And so I filmed for a year the whole trajectory of what became a really fun train wreck. But part of that train wreck, I met one of the passengers, and that was Dino Martin, and she performed at that concert, what was left of it. And we became friends. She saw my film Casting By that had been on HBO about Hollywood casting directors, and she loved it and said, listen, there's been no real film ever made on my dad. Would you ever consider doing a documentary about my dad? She asked myself and my producing partner, Alon. We both looked at each other and we knew we wanted to do it because Dean Martin represents an era that we love. I read an article, it was an interview with Martin Scorsese where he said he had spent 10 years trying to make a biopic on Dean Martin, a narrative fiction film. Couldn't do it, he couldn't crack it. So we took that as a challenge. And it took 5 years, but we knew that it was worthwhile because Dean's story kind of encapsulates a huge part of American mass media from the mid-40s all the way through really the 90s.
Where did you come in on this, Paul?
Not at the very beginning, but certainly a couple of years ago. And I've known Tom for some time now and have been involved with some other projects of his. But this topic was, very fascinating to me. I've always been aware of Dean's talent. I think a lot of us, appreciated his talent, but I think when you learn more about him as a person, and he's endlessly fascinating. It's been a while, but I think people are responding just so well to this film and love the film, and I think it's really because of Dean as the talent that he was.
So you work with Tom a lot. Were you on board almost immediately with this?
Yeah, it was definitely a no-brainer for us. I mean, Tom and I are always in sync pretty much with the projects that we want to do, and when Dina approached us, I mean, we sort of looked at her, looked at each other sort of in disbelief, and there was no hesitation in saying, yes, we want to do this.
I think Jerry Lewis already knew he was a comedian. Did Dean Martin is the question. I think
Jerry really pulled it out of him. I mean, I think he's a natural comedian. He was probably even funny as he was growing up, but he wasn't aware, I think, that was going to be something he would utilize on stage until Jerry pulled it out of him.
You're in some ways giving his legacy to another generation. What kind of responsibility did you feel about that?
I say this, I mean, Dina ultimately had approval over the film because she had asked me if I wanted to do it, and I felt an incredibly sacred responsibility to the family to tell an honest story about their dad. If I had information that might have been controversial, I would still put it in the film. I would have to negotiate that with the family. But if the film is not honest, then the film will not be seen or cared about by anybody. And with Dean, it wasn't really a problem, because there was nobody who was digging up dirt on Dean Martin. He was just this mostly incredibly stand-up guy.
Did you actually say, let's identify the audience, let's identify how to get the audience? Was there any kind of strategy on that level?
Not really. The idea of bringing in newer stars like John Hamm and RZA, who's an amazing master of hip-hop with the Wu-Tang Clan. And the reason RZA came is I think Alon found out that he had lived in Steubenville for a time where Dean had grown up. Yeah. So RZA almost immediately said yes, and then gave this incredibly insightful hour-long interview. And it's those younger voices coming in that we felt like we needed to really show that Dean has had this broad impact on culture, including among big stars of today. John Hamm and Alec Baldwin is in the film.
I would agree. That's the only time we sort of were calculating that sense in terms of the audience. But for the most part, I mean, I think what happens more often than not, and sometimes we have to show it instead of tell it when it comes to pitching these films out, often people just assume even no matter how many times we tell them we're not going to make this hagiography or this paint by numbers sort of dismissive look at or non-inconsequential look at this person. We're making a movie.
I suppose we've already just said why, but let me get it from you. Why did you choose that? Rosebud,
well, I thought about the journalist in Citizen Kane who talks to the different people in Kane's life to try to figure out who the man was. So I thought when I was making this film, like maybe I'll get a journalist or some cool personality to kind of come in and frame these different aspects of Dean's life. That was the original idea. What I find with documentaries is all the best laid plans just go away as you start to just tell the story. But the rosebud artifice I always thought was fun.
Totally, I agree. I think it's one of the very fascinating parts about how the story is structured. But one of the things I wanted to say earlier is I think a lot of the values in the film are timeless. But what's not timeless is our ability to interview some of the key people that knew him.
You were very good at standing back and letting this team put it together. But what was that like for you?
I know them, I know their work, and so that's, it was very scary because there's a lot, I mean, my dad, born in Steubenville, Ohio, and became this, huge megastar. He was Dino Paul Crocetti, didn't speak English until he was 6 years old. And, in Steubenville, Ohio, so it's pretty remarkable what he did in his life. And I knew that they could portray that.
Again, what they were saying beforehand is there's nobody who has a bad word to say about Dean Martin.
He could go have dinner with the Queen of England, and then the next day he could be, with the busboys, in Vegas, helping them cook. And he was perfectly happy with both. And he always taught me, he said, Dina, treat people the way you want to be treated. And that's exactly what he did.
Did you feel you knew your dad? It's weird with a dad, though, right? Because there's parts you don't want to know, like you want him as your dad.
I got to know him better than even, my mom, even, better than my stepmom, better than Jeannie. Because, in fact, she was so funny, and she said, I've been with him for 23 years, I still don't really know him. And I think he had to compartmentalize, everything that he was doing in his life, because I can't believe that this one man did all of that in his life. What he did was so amazing, but he made it look so easy. I don't think that he got the recognition that he should have. Because he never, called his PR people to have, put him into, do PR for him, except for twice. Once he was upset with Billy Wilder because he said that actors were idiots, and so he took out an ad in the... Lazy, thought they were lazy, in Variety. And then the other time when he got a hole-in-one. He said, you put that out. I mean, those are things that, that mattered to him.
Again, it goes back to show business is a very seductive thing.
Right.
It's easy to get lost. It doesn't sound like he ever got lost. That thing about family is massive in the culture, and he grew up speaking Italian until he was 6.
Yeah.
Is that, do you think, what grounded him?
It could be. His father was a barber. It came over on Ellis Island September 11th, actually, 1913, and settled in Steubenville, Ohio. And he married my grandmother, and she was a seamstress and a great cook. Taught me how to make the pasta fagioli. But so it was family, and that's where he got his sense of style.
Dean didn't strive to be famous. A lot of people have this deep insecurity. Jerry Lewis would be a great example of this. Dean fell into his fame because he met this kid, Jerry Lewis.
Right.
And like I said earlier, his fame just exploded. He became one of the most famous people in the world. It wasn't necessarily something he seeked out or really, really needed. And I think that's a big difference with Dean.
I don't know of anyone right now who has it all.
I think the culture has shifted. So it used to be that you had to do everything. Like, look at Florence Henderson dancing, tap dancing.
She's fantastic.
And then she's Mrs. Brady. They had such
Right.
versatility back then because they almost had to.
They had to.
Today
yes.
you could become a star by being an Instagram influencer and actually not have much
Be in
talent
your
at all.
closet, and
Well, media has changed so much. What's one of the things that stuns me, it's kind of a subtext to the movie because you're focusing on him, is how the culture was changing and how acts like that were affecting parts of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, because when Martin and Lewis hit, they were a huge nightclub sensation.
Right.
People only read about them. And then in 1950, television had exploded, and they were on TV and suddenly introduced to millions of people in a way that had never really been done before.
And one of the things I think that I hope your documentary does is remind people of his voice.
Yeah.
Aside from the comedy and the handsomeness and the suaveness and the humor and the acting and the warmth and all of that stuff, if you strip it all back, there's that voice and the ability to interpret.
Yeah, John Home in the film says, when I hear Dean sing, I hear him smiling.
That's
and
right.
I think that's true.
Thank you so much, everybody, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.